Hi, I'm David Kinnaman, president of Barna Group, and it's a pleasure to be with Jimmy Mellado, CEO of Compassion International. Thanks for joining us today. The first thing I want to ask you is that you've been working for most of your career with pastors, with church leaders. When you think about the state of today's pastors, what words or phrases come to mind?
Actually, the first word that comes to mind is strategic. I think pastors are strategically placed right now in a world that's becoming increasingly turbulent, chaotic, unpredictable, complicated. And pastors are the ones that are stewarding the church. They're the ones that are leading and influencing the body of Christ that was charged by Jesus himself to in fact redeem, restore this world for him. But I think the job of a pastor is more difficult today than I think actually ever.
And why do you think that is?
If you think about 2,000 years of church history, most of the leadership enterprise functions occurred above the local church expression. In the denominational hierarchies, we had these massive denominational hierarchies, and then you had the local church, the local parish expression in the community. The role of a pastor was to be the pastor, the theologian, the mercy giver, the preacher, and that was it. Now, in the last 3 decades or so, there's been a massive shift. Now all those enterprise functions are being put inside the local church expression, at the local level. So now a senior pastor, in addition to being, a theologian and a pastor and a shepherd and mercy giver and counselor and theologian, church historian, that pastor now has to be a land and building developer, organizational design developer, a strategist, a people development expert, a visionary, an awesome communicator. It's almost like they have to be a pastor and a CEO, because in fact they're leading an increasingly complicated enterprise.
Right. Well, let's change gears a bit and talk a little bit about global poverty, about what you're doing now here at Compassion. So talk a little about the role of local churches when you see this opportunity of serving the poor around the world.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus is the one that gave the church the mandate to reach and restore and redeem this lost world for him. And it's church leaders, it's pastors that are called to, in fact, equip and steward the body of Christ to, in fact, live out its purpose. And how can the church begin to meet that need? With the local expressions of the congregation and through partnership with other congregations around the world that really help the body of Christ be one body of Christ in the world.
You've been here at Compassion now about 4 years, coming on 4 years, and what have you learned about the ways that U.S. Christians maybe misunderstand sort of global issues and serving the poor around the world?
Sometimes I think this issue of poverty feels so insurmountable, so big. We hear numbers like 400 million children living on less than $1.90 a day, and we go, well, what can I do?
Yeah.
It's just so overwhelming. What can one person do? What can one congregation do? And so we end up really more having a bit of a defeatist attitude and don't get involved to the extent that we could get involved. And so I think that's probably another misunderstanding, is the impact that one person can make in the life of another person, and the impact that one church can make in the life of a whole community.
A lot of our polling for Compassion actually shows that Americans don't believe we've been making a lot of progress against global poverty, but that's not true. Talk a little bit about some of the progress that's being made.
Yeah, some of the amazing progress is in the last few decades, the amount of people living in extreme poverty has been cut in half. I mean, it used to be over 50%, and now it's around 26% in the world. So, I mean, there's been enormous progress on that front.
What are some of the things that you think will be the preferable future for the way the church engages with global poverty? In other words, do you think there are some trends on the horizon? You've just mentioned some of them, but are there any others or ways that the church might express itself in the next decade that you're forecasting or that you envision?
For hundreds of years, the sending of missionaries was, in fact, the missions core strategy. I think there are parts of that will continue going into the future, but I think a wonderful, growing, emerging trend that I think is a really good thing and a very healthy thing is that churches are no longer wanting to write checks. They're wanting to not only write the check, but take the check and build relationship with the people that are going to absorb those resources and invest those resources in their ministry. So there's this rise of church-to-church relationship where churches in the well-resourced world, churches in the under-resourced world are building these long-term relationships where, in fact, I've talked to some of these leaders and they start to regard themselves as one church. And then here's the part that I love about compassion strategy is that through the sponsorship mechanism, we can connect the congregations relationally, family to family, child to child, so that when the well-resourced congregation is investing to build a church building, they're going, oh my goodness, we're investing in that building for Juan that I know, because they're my child. And so for the congregation to know the congregation, because 95% of the congregants aren't going to make a trip.
Right.
But we can help them build relationship, and then institutionally, the church can invest their institutional mission dollars on top of the relational capital that's been built between the congregations, and invest in the needs of the community in a systemic way that's responsible, it's long-term, it's developmental, and it doesn't create inappropriate dependencies.